step away from the vehicle, hands where I can see them." The gas pump clicked off, but Brigadier General Darius Langston didn't move, his calm eyes locked onto the young officer who hadn't even asked for ID. Within seconds, the decorated Army leader found himself in handcuffs, surrounded by onlookers, accused of a crime he didn't commit, all because of how he looked. The sun was just starting to dip behind the rooftops of Greenfield, North Carolina, when Brigadier General Darius Langston pulled into the Shell station off Highway 22. It had been a long afternoon at the Veteran Outreach Center, meeting with former soldiers, shaking hands, listening to stories that never seemed to lose their weight no matter how many times they were told. He wore a simple charcoal polo tucked into jeans, clean sneakers, and a weathered Fort Liberty ball cap that only hinted at the decades of service behind his calm, steady eyes. No ribbons. No rank. Just a man in his 50s with a tired back and a quiet dignity. Pump number 4. That's where he parked his Dodge Charger, black with government plates that most civilians wouldn't even notice. He stepped out slowly, shoulders tight from old parachute injuries and desert deployments, and slid his credit card into the reader. The nozzle clicked, and the tank began to fill. It was supposed to be a 5-minute stop. But the patrol car that rolled in behind him had other plans. The cruiser didn't pull up to the pump. It angled in from the side, parking just far enough to block the exit. The officer stepped out fast. No greeting. No smile. Just posture. He was in his early 30s, lean with a square jaw, buzz cut still razor sharp, sunglasses on despite the fading light. Officer Kyle Benson. A name tag barely clung to his chest, but the stiffness in his stride said all you needed to know. He walked straight toward Darius like he already knew the outcome. "Sir, step away from the vehicle. Hands where I can see them." Darius blinked, confused, but instinctively lifted his hands. "Is something wrong, officer? You match the description of a robbery suspect. 10 minutes ago. Right down the road." Kyle's voice was sharp, clipped, like he was reading off a script written in suspicion. Darius stayed calm. "Officer, I just came from the Veteran Center on Branson. I can show you my—" I said step away from the car. Now. By then, a mother wrangling her toddler into the back seat of her SUV had stopped moving. An older man leaned against the hood of his pickup, watching. The quiet corner gas station was no longer quiet. Darius slowly moved toward the hood of his car, the nozzle still dripping fuel onto the concrete. He kept his voice measured, not out of fear, but discipline. "I'm Brigadier General Darius Langston, United States Army. I am not armed. I would like to show you my military ID." Kyle didn't blink. "Keep your hands visible. Turn around." It wasn't caution. It was decision. And in that moment, Darius knew it. The kind of knowing that comes not from fear, but from the weary recognition of a pattern too familiar to be shocking. A phone came out from somewhere. The man by the pickup. Recording had begun. Darius turned slowly. "Officer, please check my credentials. I have nothing to hide." The cuffs were already out. Kyle moved in fast, snapped one wrist and then the other without hesitation. The metal bit into old scars. Darius flinched slightly but said nothing. The toddler started crying. The woman whispered something sharp under her breath. Another phone was out now. 2 angles. 3. Across the lot, a blue pickup truck had just pulled in. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Deputy Marcus Reed, off-duty, khakis, and a hoodie, soda run on his mind. The moment his boots hit the pavement, he heard it. That voice. Calm. Low. Steady. A voice he hadn't heard in years but would never forget. It was the voice that had talked him through an ambush in Kandahar. That had issued commands through smoke and sniper fire. That had held a crumbling unit together with nothing but presence. Reed froze for half a second, then moved. He walked fast but not aggressive. Hand lightly resting near his belt, not for intimidation, just instinct. As he approached the scene, he saw Darius, face calm, shoulders straight, hands cuffed behind his back, and still trying to de-escalate. "What's going on here?" Reed asked, his voice firm but even. Kyle turned, already defensive. "Step back, sir. This is a police matter." Reed didn't flinch. He flipped his badge from his belt. "Cumberland County. Deputy Marcus Reed. I asked you a question." Kyle narrowed his eyes. The suspect matched the description. He refused to comply. Reed stepped closer. "Did you check his ID?" "I said he refused." "No. Did you check his ID?" Kyle hesitated. His jaw twitched. Reed looked directly at Darius. "Sir, are you injured?" "No," Darius replied quietly. "Just humiliated." A voice from the crowd cut in. He offered his ID. The cop wouldn't even look at it. Reed turned back to Kyle, who was now visibly sweating under the collar of his uniform. "Uncuff him." "I was following protocol." "You're 2 minutes away from being on every news station between here and D.C., Reed snapped. "These phones are live, officer. You're about to become a headline." Still frozen, Kyle looked at the growing crowd, then at his cuffs, then at Reed. "Back up," Reed said. He reached forward, unclipped the keys from Kyle's duty belt with the ease of someone who'd done it 100 times, and unlocked the cuffs from Darius's wrists. The crowd murmured. Someone clapped quietly. Darius rubbed at the red lines on his skin. "Thank you," he said softly. "I'm sorry this happened," Reed replied. "But I wasn't going to let it finish like that." Kyle stepped back, hands still hovering awkwardly near his holster, like he didn't know what to do without control. He tried to reassert himself, but it was too late. The footage had already captured the truth. The man he'd cuffed wasn't just innocent, he was honorable. Reed walked to his truck and grabbed his phone. "Watch, Commander," he said when the line picked up. "We've got a problem. Shell station off Highway 22. An officer just wrongfully detained a United States Army general. I need someone out here now." People began to drift away, but not before nodding to Darius. A few mouthed "thank you." One man simply raised a hand to his chest in quiet respect. Darius didn't speak for a long moment. He leaned back against his car, eyes scanning the fading sky. He had stood under rocket fire, had negotiated with foreign commanders, had rescued wounded soldiers from collapsed buildings. But none of that had protected him from being mistaken, judged, and restrained within a matter of minutes in the country he'd given his life to serve. Deputy Reed stayed by his side. "You okay?" "Physically, yes." "And otherwise?" "The answer's the same." They stood in silence for a few seconds before Darius said, almost like he was thinking out loud, "I've been treated worse by enemies. But I never thought I'd feel like a suspect at home. Not like this. Not after everything." Reed looked away, jaw tight. "You didn't deserve that." "I know." The sound of approaching sirens broke the stillness. This wasn't going to stay at a gas station. And neither of them knew just how far the story would travel. Not yet. But the world had already started watching. The sirens drew closer, their high-pitched wail slicing through the heavy silence that had settled over the Shell station in Greenfield. Brigadier General Darius Langston stood beside his charger, rubbing the raw red marks left by the cuffs, his expression unreadable, stoic, but not detached. Deputy Marcus Reed stayed close, his stance protective yet composed, while Officer Kyle Benson paced a few feet away, arms crossed tight over his vest, the shine of sweat just beginning to bead at his temples. The crowd had thinned, but not dispersed. Too many people had seen what happened. Too many phones were still recording. And even though Darius hadn't raised his voice once, the atmosphere crackled with a tension that wouldn't be smoothed over with a simple apology. That video, of a black Army general being handcuffed at a gas pump in broad daylight after offering his ID, was already in the hands of the internet, and the internet doesn't forget. By the time Lieutenant Tanya Morales from the Greenfield Police Department arrived, the sun had dipped low behind the trees and the temperature had dropped, but the air was hotter than ever. Morales was sharp, mid-40s, all business, and the kind of leader who didn't flinch when officers tried to posture. She took one look at Reed, then at Darius, then at the still defensive Benson, and knew this wasn't a scene she could quietly brush under the rug. "Talk to me," she said, stepping between the vehicles, nodding at Reed. He gave her a quick rundown, no dramatics, just facts. How Benson had approached a man pumping gas, refused to look at his identification, ignored multiple verbal confirmations, and escalated to handcuffs in front of a growing audience. The man he detained is Brigadier General Darius Langston, U.S. Army. You can verify that in 30 seconds. But he didn't even try, Reed concluded, voice even, steady. Morales turned to Benson. Is that accurate? Kyle shifted, eyes darting briefly to the onlookers. He matched a description. I was acting on probable cause. Did he resist? No. Did he offer identification? Kyle paused just a beat too long. He said he had ID. But what? Morales' tone was still calm, but the edge was there now. You didn't think a middle-aged black man in jeans and a ball cap could be a general? The silence that followed was damning. Benson didn't respond. Morales exhaled sharply through her nose. She turned to Darius. Sir, I want to extend a formal apology. Darius held up a hand. I'm not here for apologies, Lieutenant. I just want the truth on record. That's all. And with that, he walked slowly back to his car and leaned against the hood, folding his arms across his chest, not in anger, but in patience. He'd been here before, not in this exact moment, but in what it represented. Misjudged, minimized, mishandled. Not because of anything he did, but because someone else refused to see him clearly. Reed wasn't done. Not by a long shot. That night, after filing his report and seeing Darius safely on his way, he returned home and recorded a video in his kitchen. No fanfare. Just a phone propped on a mug, his badge in the frame. My name is Deputy Marcus Reed, badge number 4287, Cumberland County. I witnessed Officer Kyle Benson of the Greenfield PD wrongfully detain a decorated U.S. Army general today, without cause, without verification, and in direct violation of standard procedures. He ended the video with a simple line, "We cannot wear the badge and turn our eyes from truth." By morning, the video had gone viral. The gas station footage had already exploded online, first local Facebook pages, then Twitter, then news outlets across the state. A black man calmly being handcuffed while trying to pump gas. A white officer refusing to check his ID. A deputy stepping in. The narrative practically wrote itself. But this wasn't just a flash in the pan. Within 24 hours, WRAL, NBC Carolina, and a regional CBS affiliate all aired the clip. News anchors used words like troubling, disturbing, and unjust. The military community responded even faster. Posts from veterans flooded social media, many of them black, many of them echoing the same refrain, "This could have been me." On Tuesday morning, an internal review was officially opened by the Greenfield Police Department. Lieutenant Morales confirmed to the press that Officer Benson had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. But that didn't stop the wave. Reporters uncovered Benson's personnel file from his previous department in rural Georgia. What they found made the headlines worse. 6 citizen complaints for excessive force. 2 for unlawful stops. No formal charges, but plenty of whispers. A pattern. And now, it had found a new audience. That same afternoon, District Attorney Evelyn Carr held a press briefing outside the Fayetteville courthouse. No podium. No media fanfare. Just a few reporters and a single statement. After reviewing available video, body cam footage, and sworn witness reports, the DA's office is moving forward with charges against Officer Kyle Benson for unlawful detention, abuse of authority, and obstruction of justice. Kyle Benson was taken into custody just after 6 p.m. and released on bond. He exited the building flanked by his lawyer and remained silent as microphones were shoved in his face. No apology. No statement. Just the look of a man watching the world change around him too fast to process. Darius said nothing publicly. He ignored the interview requests from CNN, MSNBC, and even Good Morning America. He didn't post on social media. He didn't write a statement. He simply returned to his normal routine: coffee at the corner diner, light jogs around the VA campus, mentoring new officers in quiet corners of the base. When a friend asked him why he wasn't speaking up, he replied, "Because I don't need to add noise to what's already loud. The footage speaks louder than I ever could." Meanwhile, Reed was thrust into a spotlight he hadn't asked for. Veteran groups hailed him as a hero. Others called him a traitor to the badge. One anonymous officer even left a message on his voicemail: "Hope you like making enemies, Reed." But he stayed the course. He accepted an invitation to lead a panel on ethical policing at the State Academy. He began building a training seminar for younger officers about snap judgment and implicit bias. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it because he knew what could have happened if he hadn't stepped in. That day could have gone very differently, he said in a brief sit-down with a local station. General Langston stayed calm. But what if it had been someone younger? Someone scared? We can't afford that kind of gamble. In Greenfield, the community's tone shifted. A local artist painted a mural near the Veterans Center, an abstract rendering of Darius's silhouette, hands behind his back, but standing tall. Underneath, a single line in white paint: "You don't have to raise your voice to raise the truth." It resonated. At the Shell station, someone anonymously left flowers by the pump where Darius had stood. A note was attached: "To the man who reminded us all how to carry dignity." And yet, through it all, Darius remained largely in the background. That was how he preferred it. Let the world talk. He knew who he was. He didn't need confirmation. He only wanted others to see the difference between authority and wisdom. One night, as he sat on his porch sipping tea, his phone buzzed. It was Reed. "They've put me on the docket to speak at that statewide conference in Raleigh next month," Reed said. "Thought you should know." Darius smiled faintly. "You ready for that?" "Not really. But I wasn't ready at the gas station either." There was a pause. "They're listening now," Reed added. "People who never would have looked twice before." Darius leaned back in his chair, gaze on the horizon. "Then say what needs saying." And somewhere in the heart of North Carolina, the story kept moving, not because of how loud it was shouted, but because of how deeply it was felt. By the end of that week, the storm had quieted, but the skies hadn't cleared. The headlines had moved on, the breaking news banners had faded from screens, and the viral clips of Darius Langston standing handcuffed at a gas pump were no longer dominating every timeline. But the conversation hadn't stopped, it had only shifted. Beneath the surface, it had begun to take root in quieter corners of the country. In classrooms. In briefing rooms. In coffee shops and squad cars and veterans' halls. And in those places, the story hadn't died. It had only begun to live differently. At Greenfield High School, Mrs. Cleary, a civics teacher with graying hair and no appetite for performative lessons, paused her usual curriculum on judicial systems to play the video. Her students, mostly juniors, mostly distracted, watched in silence as the familiar Shell station appeared on the screen. Some of them had been there before. Others recognized Deputy Reed's voice. No one interrupted. When it ended, she said nothing for a moment. Then one hand went up. A boy near the back. "My dad's been pulled over 6 times this year," he said. 3 of those times, he was just driving to work. Another student spoke up. "A girl in ROTC. My uncle served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He still gets followed around department stores." They didn't need a lecture on systemic bias. They lived it, saw it, carried it home with them. The footage didn't need narration. It asked its own questions. Meanwhile, at the regional VA center, Darius Langston was exactly where he wanted to be, away from cameras, away from microphones, quietly walking the halls in a simple olive jacket, offering nods and handshakes to veterans who knew the weight of silence. He didn't want the spotlight. He never had. It had taken 3 phone calls just to convince him to speak to a room of ROTC cadets at the local university the following week. And when he did, he came with no speech, no paper in hand. Just presence. I didn't plan on being the face of anything, he began, his voice calm but unmistakably firm. I've spent my life solving problems quietly, behind the scenes. But sometimes, silence is the problem. What happened at that gas station wasn't about me. It was about everyone who gets judged before they get the chance to be known. It was about the folks who don't have badges or ranks to protect them when they're misread, misnamed, or mistreated. The room was still. Not out of politeness, but wait. He let the silence settle before continuing. I was lucky. Deputy Reed was there. And someone hit record. But that shouldn't be what saves you. That shouldn't be the requirement. He paced slightly, slow and measured. You don't serve this country for applause. You serve because people matter. Not just people who look like you, or think like you, or wear the same clothes. All people. The person in front of you. Who they are. Not who you assume they are. He paused, then finished simply. And if we forget that, if we let fear and pride lead the way, we don't just lose dignity, we lose each other. There was no applause at first. Not because the message hadn't landed, but because it hit too close to home. The students didn't clap, they nodded. They thought. They carried the words out with them like something fragile. A few days later, a photo of Darius went up at the Hilltop Diner near downtown Greenfield. Nothing dramatic. Just a framed snapshot of him smiling, in uniform, beside a flag. No caption needed. People knew. At the VA center, a young veteran named Isaiah, who had mostly kept to himself, asked if he could volunteer. That day at the gas station, he told Darius quietly, it changed something. Made me want to stand a little straighter. Darius patted his shoulder. Then make sure you're standing for the right things. And over in Raleigh, Deputy Marcus Reed was now sitting at the front of a training session with 22 law enforcement officers from 3 counties. Some looked skeptical. Others looked exhausted. A few were defensive from the jump. Reed didn't sugarcoat it. What happened in Greenfield wasn't about a mistake. It was about a mindset, he told them. Snap judgment isn't just a moment, it's a pattern. And if you're going to wear that badge, you better understand what your power feels like to the people you use it on. He showed the video. He didn't dramatize it. He let it play. When it ended, the room was quiet. Then a young officer in the back raised his hand and said, I didn't know who General Langston was when I first saw the clip. I probably would have done the same thing Benson did. Reed didn't flinch. He asked, would you have asked for ID? The officer nodded. Then maybe you wouldn't have. That was the point. Not perfection. Not political correctness. Just clarity. Humanity. The ability to pause before concluding. Elsewhere, Officer Kyle Benson had gone silent. No press appearances. No union statements. Just a suspension letter and a court date looming. Some of his former colleagues reached out with terse messages. One said, you blew it. Another simply wrote, not surprised. Benson, sitting alone in his apartment with the blinds drawn, replayed the moment over and over again. Why hadn't he just looked at the ID? Why had he rushed? But deep down, he knew. He hadn't seen a man. He'd seen a profile. A match. A threat. And the cost of that moment now had a name, a face, and a national audience. Back at the university, a young cadet asked Darius during a smaller breakout session, Sir, how do you stay calm when someone comes at you sideways? Darius looked at him for a moment and said, "You remember who you are, before someone else tries to name you." The cadet wrote it down. But more importantly, he carried it with him. And maybe that's what mattered most. Not the court case. Not the trending clip. Not even the mural or the news coverage. What lasted was the reflection. The mirror it held up. The slow shift. Because real change doesn't always shout. Sometimes it stands quietly at a gas station, holds its composure, and forces a country to ask itself a question it can't unsee. And sometimes that's where the story begins, not where it ends. As the author of this story, I want to take a moment to reflect not just on what happened to Brigadier General Darius Langston, but on what it reveals about the world we live in. This wasn't just a story about mistaken identity. It was a story about how quickly assumptions can override facts, how power without wisdom can become dangerous, and how dignity in the face of injustice can still teach us something powerful. General Langston didn't shout. He didn't resist. He stood with the quiet strength of a man who has weathered far more than a pair of handcuffs at a gas station. And yet, his restraint should never have been necessary. That's the painful truth. We live in a country that asks for service, sacrifice, and loyalty. But sometimes, even those who have given the most are not granted the basic respect they've earned, simply because of how they look. That should shake us. Not just because it happened to a high-ranking military officer, but because it happens to people every day who don't wear stars on their shoulders, who don't have someone recording, who don't have a deputy ready to speak up. But this story also showed us the power of doing the right thing, even when no one expects you to. Deputy Marcus Reed didn't have to get involved. He wasn't on the clock. He could have looked the other way. But he didn't. He remembered who the man in front of him was, not just by rank, but by character. And in doing so, he reminded all of us what true integrity looks like. So here's the lesson: when you're in a position of power, whether you wear a badge, lead a team, or simply stand in front of another human being, you carry the responsibility to pause, to see clearly, and to act with conscience. Judgment without understanding is dangerous. And silence in the face of injustice? That's not neutrality, it's complicity. To our listeners and supporters of U.S. Instructive Stories, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to engage with stories like this. Stories that aren't always easy to hear, but are always necessary. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you reflect, share it. Talk about it. Let it live in conversation. Because sometimes, the right story at the right moment can open the right eyes. And as always, remember, the next story we tell might be closer to home than you think.